I am a contractor for the things that go bump in the night. You won't find my business listed in the yellow pages or on any website. My clients find me through whispers in back alleys and panicked phone calls made from burner phones. My name is Mason, and I specialize in one thing: containment. I reinforce basements, build panic rooms, and install steel doors that can withstand 10 tons of force. Most people think I build these safe rooms to keep bad people out. They're wrong. I build them to keep the monsters in. I've been in this business for 12 years. I have seen things that would make a grown man cry for his mother. I have cleaned up blood that wasn't human and repaired claw marks that were carved deep into solid concrete. I have a set of rules that keep me alive. Rule number 1, never ask how they got infected. Rule number 2, always get paid in cash up front. And rule number 3, never ever stay past sunset on the night of the full moon. I broke rule number 3 last month. I am recording this because I don't know if the scratching at my own front door is the wind or if my last client finally tracked me down. This is the story of the job that almost ended my life. The scratching is getting louder now, like wet nails on wood, and I need to get this truth out before the door gives way. It started on a Tuesday with a phone call that woke me up at 3 in the morning. The voice on the other end was rough, like gravel grinding together in a cement mixer. He didn't introduce himself. He just gave me an address and a number. $50,000. That is triple my usual rate. Greed is a dangerous thing, and in my line of work, it is usually fatal. I should have hung up the phone and gone back to sleep. Instead, I grabbed a pen and wrote down the address. It was a property way out in the sticks, near a place called Hollow Creek. The voice told me the job was urgent. He said the condition was worsening, and his current setup wasn't going to hold much longer. I could hear the desperation in his tone, but I also heard something else: fear. Not the kind of fear you have when you are scared of dying. It was the fear of what you might do to someone else. It was the sound of a man who knew he was losing control. I told him I would be there by noon. I packed my truck with my heavy-duty tools, the silver-threaded welding rods, the reinforced steel plating, and my shotgun loaded with rock salt and silver bearings. I told myself it was just another job. I was lying to myself. Hollow Creek was a ghost town of a place, just a few dirt roads and trees that looked like they were dying from the roots up. The branches were bare and twisted, looking like skeletal fingers reaching for the sky. The address led me to a massive farmhouse that sat alone on a hill. It looked normal enough from the outside: white paint, a big porch, an old tire swing hanging from an oak tree. But as I pulled my truck up the long driveway, the hair on the back of my neck stood up. The air smelled wrong. It didn't smell like pine or fresh-cut grass. It smelled like copper and wet dog. A man was waiting for me on the porch. He was tall, thin, and looked like he hadn't slept in a week. His eyes were sunken deep into his skull, and his hands were wrapped in bandages that looked stained with old iodine. This was my client, Mr. Halloway. He didn't smile when I got out of the truck. He just pointed toward the cellar doors that led into the basement. "Down there," he said. His voice was quiet, almost a whisper, like he was afraid of waking something up. "The current door is steel, but it's bending. I need you to reinforce the frame and add a secondary lock, and I need it done before Friday." Friday was the full moon. That gave me 3 days to turn a root cellar into a fortress. I walked down the stone steps into the basement, shining my heavy flashlight into the dark. The smell hit me harder down here. It was a thick, musky stench that burned my nose and tasted metallic on my tongue. The basement was large, with a dirt floor and stone walls that were damp with moisture. In the far corner I saw the containment area Halloway had built himself. It was a steel cage, bolted into the stone. It looked strong, but when I got closer, I saw the problem. The steel bars were bent outward. Something had grabbed those bars and pulled them apart like they were made of licorice. I ran my gloved hand over the metal. There were deep grooves scratched into the steel. These weren't just scratches, they were gouges. Whatever was locked in here had incredible strength and claws harder than industrial steel. I looked back at the wooden stairs. If that creature got out of this cage, it would tear through the wooden ceiling and be in the living room in seconds. I turned to Halloway, who was standing at the top of the stairs, watching me with a strange intensity. "This isn't just a wolf," I said. "The bite pressure required to bend this steel is over 2,000 pounds. What exactly are we dealing with here?" Halloway didn't answer. He just threw an envelope thick with cash onto the dirt floor. I picked up the envelope and counted the money. It was all there, $50,000 in used hundreds. The bills felt greasy, like they had been handled by dirty hands. I put the cash in my jacket and nodded. "All right," I said, "but we do this my way. I need to pour a concrete footer for the new bars. I need to line the walls with acoustic dampening foam, because I know these things get loud. And I am installing a time lock on the door. Once it's shut, it does not open until sunrise. No exceptions." Halloway nodded quickly, wringing his bandaged hands together. "Do whatever you have to do. Just make sure it holds." I started work immediately. I brought in my portable mixer and started pouring quick-set concrete reinforced with rebar. The physical labor felt good. It kept my mind off the feeling that I was being watched. Every time I turned my back to the dark corners of the basement, I felt eyes on me. I knew the basement was empty, but the instinct was there. It was the same feeling a rabbit gets when a hawk is circling overhead. It was a primal warning signal firing in my brain. I worked until my muscles burned and the sun started to go down. I told Halloway I would be back at dawn to start welding. He told me to leave the property immediately and not to come back until the sun was fully up. He was terrified of the dark, looking out the windows as if expecting an invasion. The next morning I arrived at 6 sharp. Halloway looked even worse. His bandages were fresh, but I could see blood seeping through the white gauze on his left hand. It looked like a bite mark, but I didn't ask. In this business, questions get you killed. I went straight to the basement. The concrete had set perfectly. Now it was time for the steel. I used a special alloy I ordered from a supplier in Germany. It was mixed with a high percentage of silver. Silver burns them. It makes them hesitate. If they touch the bars, it sears their skin. It's a cruel deterrent, but it saves lives. As I was welding the first panel into place, I found something stuck in a crack in the stone wall. It was a tooth, but it wasn't human tooth, and it wasn't a wolf tooth. It was something in between. It was long, yellow, and jagged. I held it up to the light. It looked like it had been broken off with extreme force, maybe snapped against the stone during a violent thrashing. I put the tooth in my pocket. I don't know why I kept it. Maybe I wanted proof that I wasn't crazy. I finished the first wall of the cage by noon. The sparks from my welder lit up the dark basement like fireworks. It was noisy, hot work. I was making a fortress, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was building a tomb. By the afternoon of the second day, I noticed something strange about the scratches on the old cage. I had assumed the creature was just thrashing around in a blind rage, trying to get out. But when I looked closer, holding my light at an angle, I saw a pattern. The scratches were concentrated around the locking mechanism in the hinges. The creature wasn't just a mindless beast. It was testing the structural integrity of the cage. It was looking for a weak point. This terrified me more than the bent bars. A smart monster is the most dangerous thing in the world. A wolf runs on instinct. It attacks what's in front of it. A dogman? They think, they plan, they remember. I realized I needed to upgrade the locking mechanism. A simple keypad or key wouldn't work because this thing had dexterity. I needed a hydraulic system that operated from the outside. I went to my truck and grabbed the heavy-duty hydraulics I usually save from bank vaults. When I got back down, Halloway was standing in the middle of the basement, staring at the wall. He was muttering to himself. "I can't let it happen again," he whispered. "Not again." I cleared my throat, and he jumped about a foot in the air. He was a nervous wreck, his skin pale and clammy.
"Mr. Halloway," I said, keeping my voice calm, "I am upgrading the lock, but I need to know something. Has it ever gotten out before?" Halloway stayed silent for a long time. The silence stretched out in the damp basement air, broken only by the drip of condensation. Finally, he looked at me. "Once," he said. "Last year. It got into the barn. The horses. There was nothing left." He was shaking. "Please, Mason, you have to make sure it can't get out. I can't have that blood on my hands again." I nodded. I understood his pain. Most of my clients were good people who were cursed with something terrible. They didn't want to hurt anyone. They just wanted to ride out the storm without killing their neighbors. I got back to work with renewed focus. I wasn't just working for the money anymore. I was working to keep this man from becoming a murderer. I welded the hinges with triple beads. I anchored the frame into the bedrock. I worked until my hands were blistered and my back screamed in protest. By the time I left that evening, the cage was 90% done. One more day, Friday, the day of the full moon. The deadline was tight, but I was going to make it. I had to make it. Friday morning. The air was heavy and humid. Storm clouds were gathering on the horizon, dark purple bruises against the sky. I pulled up to the house and saw Halloway pacing on the porch. He was wearing a heavy coat, even though it was warm out. "Is it ready?" he asked before I even got out of the truck. "Almost," I said. "I just need to install the final door panel and hook up the timer." Halloway looked at the sky. "You have until sunset," he said. "Once the sun goes down, you need to be gone. Far gone." I went down to the basement. The smell was unbearable today. It smelled like rotting meat that had been left in the sun. I gagged and pulled my shirt over my nose. I tried to ignore it and focused on the door. It was a massive slab of steel, 4 inches thick. I hoisted it under the hinges using a chain pulley system. It swung shut with a heavy, satisfying thud. It was a masterpiece of engineering. Nothing was getting out of there. I wired up the timer and set the hydraulic pins. I tested it 3 times. Click, hiss, thud. Locked. It was perfect. I started packing up my tools. I was ready to take my money and run. But then I made a mistake. I left my welding mask inside the cage. I stepped inside the cage to grab the mask. It was sitting in the corner. As I bent down to pick it up, I saw something scratched into the floor. It was hidden under a layer of dirt, but my boot had scuffed it clear. It was writing, human writing. It was scratched into the stone with something sharp, maybe a fingernail or a piece of bone. It said, "He feeds us." I froze. Us? Plural? And who feeds them? Halloway? My mind started racing. I grabbed the mask and backed out of the cage. My heart was hammering against my ribs. I looked at the new bars I had just installed. They were pristine and strong, but the message on the floor unsettled me. Was Halloway keeping a pack of these things? No, that was impossible. He was the one with the bandages. He was the one who was scared. I told myself I was overthinking it. It was probably just the ramblings of a man losing his mind to the curse. I walked up the stairs, eager to get into the fresh air. Halloway was waiting in the kitchen. He had a glass of water in his hand, and it was trembling so bad the water was spilling over the rim, splashing onto the linoleum floor. "You're done?" Halloway asked. "It's done. Solid as a rock. You lock yourself in at sunset, the timer engages, and it won't open until 6 a.m. You'll be safe." Halloway let out a breath that sounded like a sob. "Thank you," he said. "You should go now. The storm is coming." I nodded and turned to leave. But as I reached the front door, the sky outside turned a sickly shade of green. Thunder rattled the window panes. A massive crack of lightning hit the transformer on the main road. The lights in the house flickered, buzzed, and died. "No," Halloway whispered. "No, no, no." The power outage meant the electronic timer on the lock wouldn't work. The hydraulics needed electricity to engage the heavy pins. Without power, that door was just a heavy piece of metal held shut by a simple latch. It wouldn't hold a Dogman. I cursed under my breath. "Do you have a generator?" I asked. Halloway shook his head. "It's broken. I meant to fix it." I looked at my watch. Sunset was in 20 minutes. We were out of time. "Okay," I said, reaching for my tool belt. I have a manual override, but I have to bolt it shut from the outside. I have to stay. Halloway looked at me with wide eyes. You can't stay. It's too dangerous. I don't have a choice, I snapped. If I leave, that door won't hold and you'll get out. I'm staying. I'll bolt you in and I'll wait in my truck with my shotgun until morning. Halloway hesitated, then nodded. He looked relieved, which should have been my second flag. We went down to the basement by flashlight. The shadows danced on the walls, making the stone look like it was moving, twisting into strange shapes. Halloway stepped into the cage. He looked small inside the heavy steel box. "I'm sorry about this, Mason," he said. "It's okay," I said, lining up the manual bolts. "Just get comfortable. It's going to be a long night." I started tightening the heavy bolts with my wrench. The metal shrieked as I torqued it down. One by one, I secured the door. When the last bolt was in place, I checked it. It was solid. Halloway was locked in. I gathered my tools and headed for the stairs. "Good luck," I said. He didn't answer. He just stood in the center of the cage, head down, waiting for the change. I ran up the stairs and locked the basement door behind me. I needed to get to my truck and lock myself in. I made it to my truck just as the last sliver of sun disappeared behind the trees. Darkness fell over Hollow Creek like a heavy blanket. The rain started to fall, drumming on the roof of my truck. I sat there, shotgun across my lap, watching the house. I had a clear view of the basement windows. I cracked my window just an inch so I could hear. For the first hour, there was nothing, just the sound of the rain and the thunder rolling across the hills. Then, at 9 p.m., I heard it. It started as a low groan echoing up from the basement. Then came the sound of bones popping. It sounded like dry branches snapping in a fire. Pop, crack, snap. It was sickeningly loud. I gripped the shotgun tighter. I knew what was happening down there. The human body was breaking and reshaping itself. The pain must be unimaginable. Then the screaming started. It was a human scream at first, filled with agony, but then it deepened. It stretched and distorted until it wasn't human anymore. It was a roar, a deep guttural roar that vibrated through the ground and into the tires of my truck. The Dogman was here, and it was angry. Then came the impact. Boom! The whole house seemed to shudder. The creature had thrown itself against the cage. Boom! Again. I held my breath. I trusted my work, but hearing a monster tested was a different story. I could hear the metal groaning under the stress. Screech! That was claws raking against the steel. The silver alloy would be burning its skin, but it didn't seem to care. It was driven by pure rage. The sound was like a car crash happening over and over again. I checked my watch. 10:30 p.m. 8 more hours until sunrise. I could do this. I just had to wait. But then I saw movement. Not in the basement, on the porch. I squinted through the rain. The front door of the house was open. I froze. I had locked that door. I was sure of it. Had someone broken in? I grabbed my heavy flashlight and shined it at the porch. The beam cut through the rain. The front door was wide open, swinging in the wind. And then I saw muddy footprints leading out of the house. They weren't wolf prints. They were boot prints. Heavy work boots sized for a man. My mind couldn't make sense of it. Halloway was in the cage. I had bolted him in myself. Who walked out of the house? I had to check. I knew it was stupid. I knew it broke every rule. But if someone else was in that house, they were in danger. I grabbed my shotgun and stepped out of the truck. The mud sucked at my boots as I ran toward the porch. I stepped inside the house. It was quiet, except for the muffled thuds coming from the basement. The air felt electric. "Hello?" I called. Silence. I followed the muddy boot prints. They came from the hallway, leading from the basement door. My stomach dropped. I ran to the basement door. It was unlocked. The padlock I had put on it was lying on the floor, cut open with bolt cutters. I threw the door open and shined my light down the stairs. The cage door was open. The manual bolts had been screwed out from the outside. The cage was empty. Halloway wasn't there.
The wrench I had used was lying on the floor, covered in mud.
Panic hit me like a physical blow. If the cage was open, where was the Dogman? I spun around, raising my shotgun. The living room was empty. I heard a creak from the floor above me. It was up there. It was in the house. But how? Halloway was inside the cage. Unless he wasn't the one who turned. The realization hit me cold and hard. Halloway wasn't the monster. He was the keeper. He had hired me to build a cage, but he hadn't locked himself in. He had locked something else in, and someone had let it out. I heard a low growl from the top of the stairs. I slowly lifted my flashlight. Standing on the landing was a creature straight out of a nightmare. It was 7 feet tall, covered in black fur that looked wet and matted. Its head was massive, like a wolf's, but its shoulders were broad and human-like. It stood on 2 legs, hunched over. Its yellow eyes burned in the light. It opened its mouth, revealing rows of razor-sharp teeth, and let out a huff of breath that smelled like a slaughterhouse. It wasn't Halloway. It was bigger, stronger, and it was looking at me like I was the main course. The creature lunged. It moved faster than anything that size should move. It cleared the stairs in one jump. I fired. The shotgun kicked hard against my shoulder. The rock salt and silver hit it in the chest. It roared in pain, stumbling back. The smell of burning hair filled the room. I didn't wait to see if it was down. I turned and ran for the kitchen. I needed a bottleneck. I needed a place where I could defend myself. I slammed the kitchen door and shoved the heavy oak table in front of it. I could hear the thing tearing up the hallway floorboards. It was coming for me. I fumbled in my pocket for more shells. My hands were shaking so bad I dropped 2 on the floor. Crash! A clawed hand punched through the wood of the door like it was cardboard. Splinters flew everywhere. I pumped the shotgun. "Come on!" I yelled, trying to mask my terror with anger. The creature ripped the door off its hinges and threw it across the room. It stood in the doorway, filling the frame. It was bleeding from the chest, but it looked more angry than hurt. Saliva dripped from its jaws, sizzling when it hit the floor. I fired again. This time, I aimed for the knee. If I couldn't kill it, I had to slow it down. The shot blew a chunk of meat off its leg. It howled, a sound that shattered the glass in the windows. It fell to one knee. I took my chance. I dove through the broken window onto the back porch. I landed hard on the wet wood, rolling to absorb the impact. I scrambled to my feet and ran toward the barn. My truck was too far. The creature would catch me in the open yard. The barn was closer. I could hear it coming behind me. It was limping, but it was still fast. I could hear its heavy breathing, the wet slap of its feet on the mud. It was gaining on me. I reached the barn door and slid it open just enough to squeeze through. I slammed it shut and dropped the heavy wooden bar into place. I backed away, chest heaving. The barn was dark and smelled of hay and old horses. I turned on my flashlight and swept the beam around. And that's when I saw them. In the back of the barn, there were rows of cages, smaller ones, wire cages, and inside them were bones, hundreds of bones, animal bones, human bones. They were piled up in the corners. Some were old and bleached white. Others still had scraps of meat clinging to them. And on the wall, scratched into the wood, was the same message I had seen in the basement. "He feeds us." My blood ran cold. Halloway. He wasn't a victim. He was a collector. He had keeping these things, feeding them. But feeding them what? The realization made me sick. He hired contractors. He hired people who wouldn't be missed right away. He brought them out here, to the middle of nowhere. I wasn't the contractor. I was the meal. He had locked himself in the cage to stay safe while the thing, whatever it was, hunted me. That's why the padlock was cut. He had let it out. He was watching somewhere, probably laughing. The silence of the barn felt heavy with the ghosts of the people who died here. Bam! The barn door shook. The Dogman was here. It slammed against the wood, roaring. Dust rained down from the rafters. I looked around for a weapon. My shotgun was empty, and I had dropped my shells in the kitchen. I saw a pitchfork, but that would be useless against a tank like that. Then I saw it. The hayloft ladder. If I could get up there, I could kick the ladder down. It wouldn't stop it, but it would buy me time. I climbed the ladder as fast as I could. The barn door splintered. The wooden bar snapped like a twig.
The Dogman burst into the barn. It sniffed the air, its head snapping toward me. It saw me on the ladder. It crouched and leaped. Its claws grazed my boot as I pulled myself onto the loft. I kicked the ladder away. It clattered to the floor below. The creature paced below me, looking up with intelligent, hateful eyes. It couldn't jump that high with its bad leg. I was safe for the moment, but I was trapped, and it knew it. It started pacing in circles, waiting for me to make a mistake. I sat in the dark hayloft, listening to the monster pace below. I tried to think. I needed a plan. I needed to survive until sunrise. Once the sun came up, the creature would change back, and when it did, I would be waiting. I checked my pockets. I had a pocket knife, a lighter, and my phone with no signal. Not much to work with. The smell of dry hay and dust filled my nose, mixing with the metallic scent of the creature below. Hours passed. The rain stopped. The moon came out from behind the clouds, casting beams of silver light through the cracks in the roof. The creature below settled down, watching me. It knew I wasn't going anywhere. It was patient. Around 4 a.m., I heard a noise outside. A truck engine. Halloway. He was coming to check on his pet. He was coming to see if I was dead yet. Anger burned in my chest, hotter than fear. I wasn't going to die here. I was going to make him pay. I gripped the lighter in my hand until my knuckles turned white. I devised a plan. The loft was full of dry hay. I had a lighter. It was risky. If the barn went up too fast, I would cook. But fire scares beasts, and fire signals for help. I gathered a pile of straw near the edge of the loft. I waited until I heard the truck door slam outside. "Mason?" Halloway's voice called out from the yard. "Are you still with us?" He sounded calm, mocking, like he was asking if the trash had been taken out. The Dogman below looked toward the door. It whined, wagging its tail slightly. It knew its master. That was the final proof. Halloway controlled it. I lit the straw. The dry hay caught instantly. The flames leapt up, bright and hot. I kicked the burning pile over the edge of the loft. It landed right on top of the creature. It shrieked as its fur caught fire. It thrashed around, setting the rest of the loose hay on the ground ablaze. The barn began to fill with smoke, thick and black. The heat rose instantly, baking the air in the loft. "Fire!" Halloway screamed from outside. The creature, panicked and burning, smashed through the side wall of the barn, running into the night to roll in the wet mud. The path was clear. I jumped from the loft into a pile of hay that wasn't burning yet. I rolled out of the barn door, coughing, eyes stinging from the smoke. Halloway was standing there, holding a rifle. He looked at the burning barn, then at me. His face went pale. "You," he snarled. He raised the rifle. I didn't hesitate. I tackled him. We hit the mud hard. The rifle flew out of his hands. He was weak, an old man. I punched him in the jaw, and he went limp. I grabbed the rifle and stood up, aiming it at his chest. "Get up," I yelled. "Where is it?" Halloway wiped blood from his lip and laughed. It was a manic, broken sound. "She's gone," he said. "She hates fire." "She?" I asked, keeping the barrel pointed at his chest. "My wife," Halloway whispered. "She was the first. I couldn't let them kill her, so I kept her. I fed her, but she got hungry. Drifters weren't enough. She needed sport. She needed the hunt." I stared at him with disgust. He had turned his wife into a monster and used innocent people as live bait to keep her entertained. "You're sick," I said. "You're feeding people to your wife." Just then, a low growl came from the edge of the woods. The creature, the wife, was back. Her fur was singed, her skin blistered. She looked at Halloway, then at me. The sun was starting to crest over the hills. The first rays of dawn hit her. She fell to the ground, convulsing. Her bones cracked and shifted. The fur receded. Slowly, painfully, she turned back into a human woman. She was naked, covered in burns and mud, curled into a ball. Halloway tried to crawl toward her. "Martha," he sobbed. He reached out a trembling hand to touch her scorched skin. I didn't stick around for the reunion. I kept the rifle trained on them as I backed toward my truck. The keys were still in the ignition. I jumped in and floored it. I drove faster than I ever have in my life. I didn't stop until I was 2 towns over. I called the police from a payphone. I told them everything. I told them about the bones in the barn and the monster in the woods. Officer Tate called me back a week later. They found the bodies, dozens of them. They found Halloway and his wife, too. They were both dead. It looked like a suicide pact. Or maybe, when she woke up and realized what she had done, she couldn't live with it. I kept the $50,000, call it hazard pay, but I never spent it. It sits in a safe in my closet. Every time I look at it, I smell burning fur and hear the sound of those heavy bolts sliding open. I don't take jobs in the country anymore. I stick to the city, and I always bring a flamethrower. You can never be too careful, because the monsters are real, and sometimes the people who hire you are worse than the beasts they keep in the basement.